Hello, good evening. I hope your weekend went well. Before we get into another week and another mad rush at work, I thought I must keep to my promise of bringing you a discussion on a really wonderful book, and no amount of adjectives from my side will be enough to capture what this book is all about. And so instead of trapping myself into finding the right word to describe this book, let me first show you the book and then get on to discuss this a little with you and leave you to decide for yourself. This is the book, Tuesdays with Morrie. Many of you may have read it, many of you may have even seen it in bookshops. Written by Mitch Albom, and as the line after the title says, an old man, a young man, and life's greatest lesson. So the old man is a teacher, a professor of sociology from a place called Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts in the US. The young man is of course the author, and the life's greatest lesson is of course the lesson that one learns out of living, out of experience. And there are some really wonderful nuggets of truth and life, the experiences of living in this beautiful book. Don't go by the small size of the book, and don't go by the fact that it is a slim book, because I can give you at least a couple of other examples of slim books that made it big and that had a big impact in the world of literature and of course on the lives of people. Ernest Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea, very slim book, but it got him the Nobel Prize in Literature. Hermann Hesse, Siddhartha, another slim book, another Nobel Prize. So words are powerful, and you don't need fat tomes to create an impact on this world. Tuesdays with Morrie, for your information, is also said to be one of the highest ever grossers in terms of number of copies sold and so on and so forth for a memoir. It's been translated into a number of languages, and there's been a television film. There have been innumerable number of plays in the States, in Europe, in countries such as China even. So there is something about this book that lives on many years after it was published. It appeals to me very deeply because working in education and trying to make education better, trying to make learning better for children, you always are dealing with the teacher-child equation, and in many cases pupils come and pupils go, teachers come and teachers go, and everything seems to be like a big mechanical routine. You move from one year to the other, pass your exams, then get your certificates, then there's the chase for your higher education, admissions, career, acquisitions, consumptions, materialism, home, mortgage, car, all the good things in life, and so on and so forth. And when somebody talks about teachers, teachers are nowhere. On September 5th in India, we eulogize them. We say that they are the pillars of society, and without them the nation cannot be built, and so on. But then otherwise teachers are forgotten. This book reminds us that that is not the case, and that the teacher-student relationship can not only be beautiful, but it can endure. It can leave a very, very deep impact on the student years afterwards. And I think that's captured in a very beautiful statement, in a very beautiful quote in the book, and let me begin with that quote. It's from the famous American historian Henry Adams, and it says, A teacher affects eternity. He can never tell where his influence stops. So Morrie affected eternity in a sense. And Morrie did not even, Professor Morrie, sociology professor at Brandeis University, did not even imagine that one of his students would get back in touch with him 16 years after they had parted ways and write this wonderful book. What are the circumstances that lead to this book being written? For that, let me do a little bit of reading from the book to kind of place the context and get you into this narrative. I'm reading from a chapter called as the curriculum. The last class of my old professor's life took place once a week in his house by a window in the study where he could watch a small hibiscus plant shed its pink leaves. The class met on Tuesdays. It began after breakfast. The subject was the meaning of life. It was taught from experience. He goes on. No books were required, yet many topics were covered, including love, work, community, family, aging, forgiveness, and finally death. The last lecture was brief, only a few words. A funeral was held in lieu of graduation. Although no final exam was given, you were expected to produce one long paper on what was learned. That paper is presented here, and that paper is this lovely book. The last class of my old professor's life had only one student. I was the student. That's how the book begins. So it so happens that Professor Morrie Schwartz, somewhere in his late 70s, discovers one day that he has a degenerative neurological disease that's a fatal disease, and there is no known cure for it. And as Mitch Albom writes in another chapter called as The Syllabus, his death sentence came in the summer of 1994. Looking back, Morrie knew something bad was coming long before that. He knew it the day he gave up dancing. Now here is a man, this professor, who's into other things other than his academics and teaching. He's a professor of some standing, he's done a lot of work around mental health, well-being, he's published books, and so he's an academically well known. But then he's also a dancer. He was big on rock and roll, big band, the blues, and he used to attend dance sessions in the church in Harvard Square very regularly, and so on and so forth. But somewhere in the 60s he develops asthma, and then he discovers, as they do a number of tests on him, he discovers that he has what is called as amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, called ALS, which is, as Mitch Albom says, a brutal, unforgiving illness of the neurological system. And it comes as a shock to Morrie and his wife, Charlotte. Now what, he thought. And how does he, take this, shock and this revelation that he's going to die? And I think that itself tells us a lot about this wonderful man who has, through this book and through the voice of a student, taught us some of the most fundamental truths in a very, very beautiful manner, fundamental truths of living and life. But my old professor had made a profound decision, one he began to construct the day he came out of the doctor's office with a sword hanging over his head. Do I wither up and disappear, or do I make the best of my time left? He had asked himself. He would not wither. He would not be ashamed of dying. In fact, he goes on and says that he wanted others to learn from his experience of dying. He wanted to be research, as he says, a human textbook. Study me in my slow and patient demise. Watch what happens to me and learn with me. Morrie would walk that final bridge between life and death and narrate that trip. So, because he doesn't curl up in a corner, sulking, depressed, giving up completely, he begins to live life even more and more. And as he tells Mitch at one point in the book, he says, "The truth is, once you learn to die, you learn how to live." And it is in these final weeks and months of his life that a new phase, a new, very unusual phase of his life begins. And let me move on to tell you a little more about that. He starts, of course, entertaining visitors to his place. They come, his academic groups, his neighborhood, neighbors, friends, and so on and so forth. He keeps getting phone calls, and also I think as he starts degenerating, he also starts collecting his reflections on life, and he makes a huge collection of what is called as aphorisms, quotes, sayings from his side. And these quotes are shared with I think by one of his family members, or probably by one of his colleagues or friends. They're shared with a newspaper, and which publishes these quotes from a dying professor. And a news channel called as ABC News, which is a well-known channel in the United States, picks up this article, comes across this article, and then they decide to do a show on him. And they get in touch with him, and after some discussions and so on, he agrees to talk on television. And it is one of these shows that Mitch Albom sees, and Mitch by now has become a very well-known sports writer. So he's jet-setting, he's writing about big athletes and their lives and the millions they're making, and so on. So he is doing multiple things. He is chasing what we call as the American dream, buying homes and cars and travel and so on and so forth. But 1,000 miles away, he sees the first telecast of this program on TV, and this is how he reacts to it. The program aired on a Friday night. It began with Ted Koppel from behind the desk in Washington, his voice booming with authority. "Who is Morrie Schwartz?" he said. "And why, by the end of the night, are so many of you going to care about him?" 1,000 miles away, in my house on the hill, I was casually flipping channels. I heard these words from the TV set. "Who is Morrie Schwartz?" and went numb. So he realizes that through that TV channel and through that TV program, he realizes that his professor is dying. And then he feels very guilty, because at the time of graduation, he had told his professor that he would keep in touch. "Of course, I will keep in touch," he had said. But he moved on, like most other students do. And this TV program brings it all back for him, because Morrie was somebody who he loved from the depths of his heart. And he called him coach. He didn't call him teacher. He called him coach. And "Coach," he says, "all right, I'll be your coach. And you can be my player. You can play all the lovely parts of life that I'm too old for now." So Morrie is no ordinary sociology professor. He brings alive the subject, but he adds so much more from life. He talks about relationships, he talks about love, he talks about empathy, he talks about listening, he talks about so many other things, and that endears Mitch to him like anything. And then this TV program 16 years later brings all of that back. So Mitch goes back and he discovers, of course, that he calls up Morrie and he says, Professor Morrie was, "This is Mitch, I hope you remember me." And he cuts him short and he says, "I thought you were calling me coach. Have you forgotten?" And that's how he goes to his house and starts interacting with him. The book is about 14 interactions that were had on every Tuesday, and that's why the title Tuesdays with Morrie. 14 interactions between the young man and the old man, and each of these interactions is filled with nuggets of wisdom. And as we progress through the book, from the first to the last interaction, Mitch Albom sees the gradual degeneration of his professor. But throughout that entire process, Morrie Schwartz keeps his chin up, keeps teaching Mitch so many beautiful things about life, so many beautiful truths, gently gets Mitch to look inside of himself. He gets him to cry, he gets him to laugh, he gets him to understand many things in a very loving and gentle manner, which only Morrie Schwartz can do as a teacher. Right? So in the next few minutes, I'll just read a few parts from this very beautiful book. One of his aphorisms, of course, is the way you get meaning into your life is to devote yourself to loving others. Devote yourself to your community and devote yourself to something that gives you purpose and meaning. And this is something that they discuss when they talk about love. They talk about culture. They talk about money and so on and so forth. Yeah. I'll take you to a chapter called as the fourth Tuesday. We talk about death, and this is one of the eternal themes that they talk about it. And this is how it goes. "But everyone knows someone who has died," I said. This is Mitch. This is in the middle of a conversation. "Why is it so hard to think about dying?" "Because," Morrie continued, "most of us all walk around as if we are sleepwalking. We really don't experience the world fully because we are half asleep doing things we automatically think we have to do." "And facing death changes all that?" asks Mitch. "Oh yes, you strip away all that stuff and you focus on the essentials. When you realize you're going to die, you see everything much more differently." He sighed. "Learn how to die and you learn how to live." So this whole thing of letting go is something that they discuss over here. And Morrie further says in that conversation, "Mitch," he said laughing, "even I don't know what spiritual development really means, but I do know we are deficient in some way. We are too involved in materialistic things and they don't satisfy us. The loving relationships we have, the universe around us, we take these things for granted." So this is from the chapter Death. And they go on, they talk about another eternal theme, which is detachment. And let me try and read something for you from here. So he talks about detachment, and then Mitch, of course, challenges him, saying that, "But detachment doesn't mean..." Mitch asks him, "Aren't you always talking about experiencing life?" Because his professor is so full of life. He wants to experience everything. He wants to do everything. And he keeps encouraging his students to try out everything. All the good emotions, all the bad ones. Yes. So how can you do it if you're detached? Detachment doesn't mean you don't let the experience penetrate you. That's what Morrie says. On the contrary, you let it penetrate you fully. That is how you are able to leave it. And I repeat, that is how you are able to leave it. So, by throwing yourself into these emotions, by allowing yourself to dive in all the way, over your head even, you experience them fully and completely. And only then can you say, "All right, I have experienced that emotion. I recognize it. Now I need to detach from that emotion for a moment. So these are some of the themes that are explored. There is another very beautiful conversation on page 179, which is basically just ahead of the chapter, the final chapter called as We Say Goodbye, the 13th chapter, sorry, and in which there is the conversation between two waves on the sea, and one wave is very depressed and sad and feeling very upset as it sees the shore and approaching, and all the other waves are just breaking on that shore, breaking against the rock, and they're getting destroyed. And the other wave tells this wave, why are you looking so grim? And this wave says, look, can't you make out that we're all going to die? And then Morrie says on page 179, I'll just get that for you in a minute. The second wave says, no, you don't understand. You're not a wave, you're a part of the ocean. Such a beautiful fundamental truth that many of our scriptures, whether it's Buddhism or the Upanishads and other traditions, that we are all part of this whole, and that the illusion that we are separate is actually something that we take to be real, whereas the reality is that we are part of that universe. And once that realization is made, there is so much liberation in that insight and in that thought. So finally, in the 14th Tuesday, we say goodbye. When Mitch reaches Professor Morrie's house, he's told that he's very weak today, and there are very few words exchanged between Morrie and him. And Morrie says, I'm not so good today. And then Mitch goes close to him. He holds him. He says, Morrie, coach, he corrects him. Coach, I said. I felt a shiver. The ALS has begun to affect his lungs, so he cannot breathe any longer. Touched me, he whispered. He moved my hands to his heart. Here. Mitch tells him, tears welling up in his eyes, I don't know how to say goodbye. This is how, he says, we should say goodbye. He holds Mitch's hands. Love you, he rasped. I love you too, coach. No, you do. You always have. Then he cries uncontrollably, his face contorting like a baby, and Mitch holds him for several minutes and starts crying himself too. Okay then, he says, pulling away after some time. And okay then, says Morrie. Morrie died on a Saturday morning in his sleep, of course. And this is how the book ends. There are 14 chapters, and each of these chapters are about different themes. We talk about the world, we talk about feeling sorry for yourself, we talk about regrets, we talk about death, we talk about family, emotions, the fear of aging, money, love, marriage, culture, forgiveness, and we talk about the perfect day and we say goodbye. What a book this is. In the concluding chapter, I just want to end what I've end the session today by this wonderful paragraph, reading this wonderful paragraph. Have you ever really had a teacher? One who saw you as a raw but precious thing, a jewel that with wisdom could be polished to a proud shine. If you're lucky enough to find your way to such teachers, you will always find your way back. Sometimes it's only in your head, sometimes it is right alongside their beds. Well, friends, I hope this book will take you down memory's lane and get you to remember the teachers who left a mark on you in school. If it is possible, do reach back, do write back, do call them up, find out what's happening with their lives. I'm going to be continuing with this teacher-student theme for some more time, and I will talk about a few more books in this genre. Of course, Tuesdays with Morrie is the most famous of them all, but there are equally other interesting books about which I'll be talking in the coming week or two. So take care. I hope you like the session, and Shubhratri. Stay safe.